Hey all, Tom Moran here from Tom's Big Spiders. Well, we're finally about to tackle probably one of the most requested topics ever in the history of this channel, and that is the best beginner or starter old world tarantulas. I actually covered this one a couple years ago in a podcast because I honestly didn't know if I could do it justice in a shorter video, and I will include a link to that in the description area. But basically, I have a lot of people that want to make that transition from keeping New World species and maybe some of the feistier New Worlds into finally picking up Old Worlds. Now, Old Worlds tend to freak people out basically because of the fact that they can be more defensive and they pack potent venom, which could lead for very unpleasant consequences should you have a mishap with the tarantula. And I think for a lot of folks, just knowing that the potential is there for a nasty bite is enough to make them nervous and enough to make them second guess whether or not they want to bring one of these animals into their households. However, there are some species that the majority of folks out there consider to be good beginner or starter old world tarantulas, and this list of 5 here are some of the top ones that I've encountered. These are also ones that I've heard from many keepers that have said that these are the ones that they started with, or these are the ones that they recommend to folks who are looking into keeping old world tarantulas. So we have my experience here and the experience of other keepers, and to be completely honest, some of these species I picked up because other keepers have been telling me over the years they make good beginners, and I wanted to try them out for myself. Now, a caveat to this. We all know that old world tarantulas pack potent venom, they are fast and they can be defensive, and we also know, because I say it on every single video just about, that temperament can vary from specimen to specimen. So although I may have a rather laid back old world and other folks may report that theirs are laid back as well, that doesn't mean there aren't some exceptions to the rule or some old worlds out there that you'll see on this list that folks will report ones that are rather high strung and or defensive. Obviously it comes with the territory when keeping old world tarantulas that there could be some of that defensiveness, and just know that there is no surefire bet when it comes to tarantula temperament. Heck, there are New World beginner species that can have nasty temperament, so that can't go without saying. So enough of me talking, let's get into my list of 5 what I think are the best and what my experience from talking to keepers has shown me to be the best old world beginner or starter tarantulas. First up, we have the Eucratocellus pachypus, or the Stout Leg Baboon. I absolutely adore my 2 ladies, and truth be told, if it weren't for the fact that they are so difficult to find, this would be my top choice for best beginner old world species. My 2 girls that I got as juveniles have been incredibly docile from day one. Although this is a fossorial species, I often catch them out and about on top of the substrate, and what will happen is if I open the enclosure and they are exposed, they will just very calmly turn around and climb into one of their burrow entrances. As you can see there, they both have 2 entrances to the burrows, and both of them are vertical, which I find interesting. When they hunt, they will use those large back legs to propel themselves out of the burrow and to grab the prey items. Unfortunately, I've never been able to catch this on camera, but it is neat to see a relatively docile T explode from the burrow entrance to snatch a cricket or roach. Now, hopefully someday somebody breeds these guys. I've had some folks tip me off that they supposedly had some for sale somewhere, but every time I check on them, it's actually a different species. Part of the issue is rumored to be that, again, they are field collected and the males look so different from the females that there have been no males brought into the market. Unfortunately, I have seen folks sell slings every once in a while, but they tend to go very quickly, and it seems like nobody, unfortunately, is breeding those slings once they mature to get new ones on the market, which again is a terrible shame because this is one of the coolest spiders I keep and would be a wonderful starter old world for just about anyone. And next up, we have Tarantulas lugardi, or the Fort Hall or Gray Starburst Baboon. There are actually a lot of other common names. We'll just stop there. These guys here, unfortunately, I haven't had all that much, having picked them up about 5 months ago. But I wanted to pick them up because they have been recommended to me many times over the years for being great beginner old world tarantulas. Unlike their more fiery cousins, the P. murinus or OBT, these guys have a reputation for being rather laid back overall, with many folks talking about the fact that theirs are not only visible, but fairly calm when you open up their enclosures to feed them. That's obviously very different from the orange cousin, the OBT, who is infamous for being more fiery and defensive. Now, these guys are obligate burrowers. However, like many of the old world tarantulas, if not given enough substrate to burrow, they will web, and some will do extensive webbing even if they are given the room to burrow. So it's always important when setting these guys up that you give them deep enclosures with a lot of space. This ensures that when you open the enclosure, you're not ripping out the webbing and disturbing the spider, which of course could lead to a more defensive animal. Now, these guys, when grown up, have a very brownish, sandy tone that is quite pretty. This here is a sling that kind of has a greenish brown look to it. They are very easy to keep overall with no moisture requirements. They do well with a water dish. Slings might like a little moist substrate, but as they put on some size, you can easily ease off that and keep them bone dry. Now, with all my experience with the species so far is limited, everything that I've seen so far falls in line with what I've heard about P. lugardi being an excellent beginner Old World tarantula species. And next up we have Ceratogyrus darlingi, or the rear horned baboon. I actually picked up my first several years ago because I was planning on doing a list of the best beginner Old World species, and this one came recommended just about as much as the P. lugardi, which I thought was awesome. And now that I've kept 4 of them, raised them to maturity, 2 males, 2 females, I can say with my own experience, yes, they tend to be rather laid-back tarantulas overall. My 2 females are very visible, which is great because this is a burrowing species. If given enough substrate, they will usually dig a series of tunnels, sometimes with 2 or 3 entrances or exits. And as an added bonus, mine have all done a great deal of webbing on the surface as well. This one doesn't have as much webbing here, but this one here you can see has webbed the snot out of its enclosure. They will often come out and hang out in the open, and then if disturbed, instead of throwing up threat postures or bolting around the enclosure, mine will turn around and just mosey back down into their burrows quite calmly, which has been great. They are awesome hunters. They grow quickly. They are very easy to keep. This is one of the tarantulas that, although the slings might prefer a little moist substrate, as they get older, you can let things dry out a bit. Make sure you give them a water dish though, and they will probably be nice enough to web up the whole water dish for you so that you keep having to replace it or cut the webbing out of it. Now, a lot of folks have also talked about the Ceratogyrus marshalli, or the straight horned baboon, also being a good beginner Old World species. I can tell you that I have one now that is a juvenile, and so far so good. It has been very similar to the darlingi in its temperament and in its behavior. So if you're looking for a good beginner Old World species, you kind of can't go wrong with any of the Ceratogyrus species. Now, for folks who are not only looking for their first beginner Old World species, but are also looking for one of those lovely blue spiders that everybody seems to covet, the Monocentropus balfouri, or Socotra Island blue baboon, is definitely one that you should check out. I have kept several of these over the years, 3 of them separately and then 9 of them in a communal, and I've had great luck with them, having received exactly 1 threat posture from one several years ago when I surprised it with a cricket. Now, like the aforementioned species on this list, these guys are usually burrowers. However, they will do an extensive amount of webbing on the surface as well. So once again, you want to give them some deep substrate and some extra room on top of the enclosure to ensure that they can do that webbing without it being ripped up every time you open up the enclosure. Mine have been medium growers overall, but they're very easy to take care of, good eaters, and don't need a lot of extra moisture. In fact, after the sling stage, most folks do just fine keeping them bone dry with a water dish. Now, one of the drawbacks with these guys, and the reason why I didn't have them as the last one on this list, is because mine tend to be very shy. Folks will report that theirs will often disappear for long lengths of time, especially around the winter time when the temperatures get cooler and the air gets drier. But when you see them out, it is totally worth it. And this is one of the few species that in captivity do great in a communal setup. You can see my communal females here. There are currently 5 of them in the enclosure. 4 of the ones I raised up were male, and they actually get along beautifully, which is amazing to watch. Now, for folks who are just getting into Old Worlds, I would caution against starting immediately with a communal setup because, again, you want to get the hang of keeping these spiders by themselves before you jump in to having to move, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5, 9, 10 of them at the same time. That can make for a very stressful rehousing and a potentially dangerous rehousing if you're not comfortable with rehousing Old World tarantulas. So for any folks looking to keep an Old World species for the first time, definitely check out the M. balfouri. They can be a little bit pricey, but prices have come down over the years. That would be one of the only drawbacks to these guys. And I will tell you, whatever you end up paying for them, it'll end up being totally worth it. And finally, we have the Harpactira pulchripes, or golden blue leg baboon. I recommend this species all the time to folks looking for a beginner old world tarantula. Back in the day, it would have been a little lower on the list due to the fact that when they first came out, they were so highly sought after that slings could run easily a couple $100s. Luckily, since then, prices have continued to come down as they've been rather easy to breed, which is great because this is a species that I think just about everybody should own. I know I tend to say all of the spiders I show are some of my favorites, but this is easily one of my top 5 species of tarantulas of all time. Now, as slings and juveniles especially, they will have a fiery golden body with blue metallic legs that really makes for a striking appearance. And the good news is the majority of them will spend plenty of time out in the open so that you can actually admire them. Now, this is technically a fossorial species. For folks where they come from in South Africa, we'll point to the fact that most of them live in burrows. However, I have raised 4 of these up to maturity, 2 males and 2 females, and my 2 females are rather visible. This one here, my big girl, actually closed up her burrow and spends the majority of the time up on top of the substrate, which means I get to see her anytime I want to. She is also very laid back and calm. I never receive threat postures from her at all. In the worst case scenario, if I disturb her or put a little light on her, she will just kind of go and hide under that cork bark log there. She never sprints around the enclosure and has been very laid back, honestly, from day one. Males, of course, can be a little more high-strung, but I can say that my 2 males were actually fairly tame overall and not the normal crazy males you see, especially with baboon species. Now, these guys are really easy to keep overall, although I give slings a little bit of moisture and juveniles a little moisture. As they get older, they can be kept on bone-dry substrate as long as you give them a water dish. Again, you may see a lot of webbing, which is great because that allows these guys to just pop out and pop right off of the substrate. As you can see with this girl here, makes her super visible. A hardy spider with a beautiful appearance that is normally fairly visible and with a laid-back temperament, despite the fact that its venom could pack a potent punch. The Harpactira pulchripes is easily one of the best old world starter tarantulas available today. Now, I do want to add a 6th tarantula to this list that was actually in the original podcast. Unfortunately, I had no footage to feature in this video, but the H. villicella, or Tanzanian Chestnut tarantula, a small dwarf, also communal species, has been mentioned many, many times when I've talked to folks about which they think are the best old world beginner species. I have kept this species before, and I can tell you it was rather laid back overall. It was a heavy webber, did a little bit of burrowing, and never got any threat poses. It was a bit shy though. However, talking to other people, they swear by it, so I wanted to make sure I added that to the list. Also, this is just my list and ones that I have heard over the years of talking to keepers. Please feel free to chime in with the species that you think are good beginners. I did leave some off of the list that folks have recommended over the years only because, for example, Poecilotheria species that I find to be very laid back overall and quite predictable, especially when compared to some of the Chelobrachys species or baboon species. They do pack a nasty bite and, if startled, can put a hurting on you. Now, the reason I don't put those on here, despite them being predictable, is folks tend to be very scared of them, and when they get their first pokies, they can make mistakes that could lead to a bite, so I've kind of left those off the list. I know there's going to be people out there that tell me that the OBT is the best beginner old world species. I have to disagree, again, partly due to the reputation of it. People, when they get those, are naturally more afraid of them than they are of other species that are mentioned on this list, and that can lead to them doing things that, again, will put them in harm's way. Also, there are enough folks out there that report legitimately defensive specimens that we really don't want to encourage folks jumping in the deep end right away with that species. Now, does that mean there aren't some real sweethearts of Poecilotheria and OBTs out there that people could keep as a first tarantula or first old world tarantula? Absolutely, of course there are. I think what it comes down to is everybody's best first old world tarantula probably ends up being the first one that they kept successfully without any incidents. So that will do it for this one. As always, if you liked it enough to subscribe, very much appreciated. You can click the little circle up in there. If you'd like to check out more videos to see what I'm about, I'll probably feature one of the species here, put another video up there. Also, I got the link to the podcast below. If you leave a comment, know that I will respond to all comments. It just may take me a couple days. That'll do it for this one, guys. As always, stay safe, and we'll catch you all next time.